welcome to episode 8 of Book Writing Tips, quick tips for new and seasoned authors. And I am your host, Alba Arango. All right, in today's episode, we are going to talk about writing backstory. And to me, backstory is so important. It really can help with character development and get your readers to understand your characters and how they are the way they are by the time your character has gotten to your story. However, if written poorly, backstory can actually take your reader out of the story and possibly even have them just close the book. So let's sit back, relax, and let's learn about some good ways to write backstory and bad ways to write backstory. Alrighty then. So today's episode will be in 2 parts as always. In the first part, I want to talk about some of the major pitfalls that authors sometimes do when we are writing backstory. And in the second part, I want to talk about some of the best suggestions I can give you of how to incorporate backstory into your story in a way that will really help your story. So with no further ado, let's get down to part 1. Pitfalls. Backstory is, I've already said it, it's an amazing way to develop your character. I mean, a lot of what you are, me are, your character is, has to do with our past. How do you then, to move your story along, add backstory in so that your reader kind of knows what's happened to your character's past without actually taking them out of the story? So some of the biggest pitfalls, we're going to do 3 of the biggest ones that authors have are these. The first one is long exposition. And this happens a lot of time at the beginning of the book where, I get it. You want your readers to know what your character has gone through to get them into the state of mind they're in right now. But if you write this long exposition of what happened to them and this and that at the beginning of the book, they're not going to want to read anymore. This is already way too much backstory at the beginning. And I'm sure you all read books like that where you're just oh my gosh, seriously, and you're flipping through pages. But if you have a new reader, they're not going to want to flip through the pages. They're just going to close the book and find another story that's going to engage them right off the bat. So be careful with these long expositions because they can really take your reader out of the story. And the goal is your main story is where you want to stay focused. So backstory does have a place, just not these long expositions that are going to take too much time away from your main storyline. So that is probably the biggest pitfall that a lot of authors have, especially new authors, but I do it too. And sometimes when I go back and I do my edits, I'm oh my gosh, this is way too long. They seriously, they do need to know this stuff, but they don't need to know 5 pages worth of it at the beginning of the book. So there are ways to deal with this, and we'll get to that in the second part of this. But let's move on to the second major pitfall, and that is the long flashback. Flashbacks are great, and they're definitely going to be something I'm going to talk about in part 2. The problem is when the flashbacks are too long, well, now you've taken the reader out of your storyline. Your storyline is what you want your reader to be engaged with. And if you have this really long flashback, they're out of your story. They may have even forgotten what your story is about or your flashback is too long. And if you have 2 or 3 of these really long flashbacks, it's really going to upset your reader because they're tuning into your book for this story that you've told, you've teased them about. It's on the back cover. And now you're writing this whole different story with this long flashback. So if you really know that you're going to be doing these long flashbacks, my suggestion to you is instead of writing your main story and then having these really long flashbacks that are going to take the reader out of the story, consider doing a dual timeline story. So you could have one chapter that takes place now, and the next chapter is 1992. And then the next chapter is present day. And then you have the next chapter that's 1992. And that way you can have maybe even 2 separate storylines. The one of today and then the backstory one that engages the reader into what's going on in this character's past. And you kind of see the 2, and this is hard to do, but if done well, it is phenomenal because you've got these two separate storylines that are kind of paralleling each other, and you get them to where, oh, wow, so that is so cool. So if you are thinking of doing these long flashbacks, consider the dual timeline, and you've got yourself a super cool avenue to tell the reader your backstory and your current story kind of like parallelly. Parallelly, is that a word? I don't know. It's a word in this podcast. Anyways, okay. The third and last pitfall I want to talk about is using unnecessary backstory. Any backstory you put into the story should have a purpose. Its purpose should be to move your story, your main story, forward. So for example, if you have, a scene where your character smells bacon and it triggers a memory, something her mom used to always cook bacon on Sundays. I mean, if you have that in like one or two sentences, this pleasant memory then that's cool. But if you have this sudden flashback and now it's like 5 pages of her going back to Sunday when that smell of bacon took over and she was doing that, and it has nothing to do with your story, then your reader isn't going to get it. And when you get back to the story, they're going to be like, why did we even do that? And I will tell you, and you probably know this as a reader yourself, when there is all this unnecessary information, it's annoying. It's distracting you from the main story that you want to see, you want to read. So be careful with your backstory and make sure every piece of backstory that you use is necessary to your current storyline. Okay. Time to take a quick break, and we are going to talk about the crazy law / writing prompt for the week. As always, if you are new to this, I always do a writing prompt that is a crazy law. So once upon a time in history, this was a law, and my challenge to you is to write a story why you think that became a law. And no fun looking it up and looking at the real story. That's not the goal of this. The goal of this is to challenge and flex your writing muscles. So here we go. Today's crazy law / writing prompt. In Brooklyn, New York, donkeys are not allowed to sleep in bathtubs. Haha. I am sure you can write an amazing story about why they had to make that a law. Okay, so while you are contemplating that, let's get down to part 2. How can you effectively write backstory into your story without taking your reader out of the story? So I'm going to give you 3 suggestions. There are, of course, many more, but here are the 3 to get you started. The first one is to use flashbacks. However, not super long flashbacks that are going to take you out of the story. Instead, it should be a short flashback that should help the reader understand that moment in your story. So if your character, say, is on the top of a hill and he's debating what to do, and if something from his past is going to guide his movement now, it would be a good opportunity to have a flashback, a short one, so that at the end of the flashback, when we're back in the story, we understand as the reader why your character chose to go in that direction. So whatever your flashback is, it should be done so that in that moment in your story, it's essential for the reader to know that element of their backstory. That will help move your story forward, and it's going to help develop your character, and so the reader understands why the character is doing what they're doing. So that's one suggestion. Suggestion number 2 is to kind of incorporate it into your dialogue. So if you have 2 characters talking, it's not uncommon, you know this, you do this with your friends, you do this with your parents, you do this with your kids. You have a conversation and you learn about something in someone's past from the conversation you're having now. Just be careful with this. It has to sound natural. It has to be brought up naturally in conversation. If, you're talking about the breakfast menu and suddenly the character asks, hey, I heard that, back blah, 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 blah. Out of the blue, you want it to flow naturally in your dialogue, in the story, so that it is something your reader sees happening as your characters are seeing it happening. So your character is learning this about the other character through a natural order in conversation. that is a great way to bring backstory in, is through dialogue. I mean, don't make it the only thing that happens. Obviously, that's not the only way you speak when you're speaking to friends or family. So kind of think about that, but that is a great way to learn a little bit about your character, as your character in your story is also learning about that character. And the third and final suggestion I would give is to do backstory throughout the entire book subtly. So this is another thing. This is in addition to, flashbacks or even in dialogue, there are ways to incorporate backstory very subtly. So for example, if you have, a character, you're at the table with your friend and you're expecting this third friend. You don't know the person, but your character doesn't know the person, but the other character does. And this third character walks in and your character is like, yeah, late as usual. Right there, you've already told backstory just by saying that very simple phrase, because your reader now knows that, one, there is a history, obviously, between these two characters, and there is some backstory there. We don't know what it is, but we know clearly that this third character is obviously always late. Or you could have a different situation where, like, you're with your boyfriend or their characters with your boyfriend or girlfriend, and they show up at a party or whatever, and they go to someone introduces you to this person, and you shake their hand, and then your boyfriend or girlfriend, or the character's boyfriend or girlfriend, goes to shake their hand, and they refuse to shake their hand, and then they kind of walk away. These are really subtle, but clearly there's backstory between these two characters that your reader can see, that your character can see between these characters, but it's subtle. Nothing was, explained. There was no exposition about it. There's no flashback. There's no even dialogue between your character and the other. It's something that happens and it's subtle. And that is a great tool to use throughout your entire book. You get to know people. You in real life get to know people this way from subtle things you see that they do. That's the same thing with your characters. They can learn about other characters from the subtle things that other characters do. Well, I hope this helps, and I am going to put a link in my description to an article or a blog post that Jane Friedman had on her blog. If you don't follow Jane Friedman, I would strongly advise following Jane Friedman. She is a really great resource with all kinds of tools for writers. But I'm going to link a specific blog post that she did specifically about writing backstory. So check that out in my description. And other than that, that's it for today. I hope you learned a little bit about incorporating backstory, what to do, what not to do. Again, if you have any suggestions for future podcast episodes, please put them in the comment. If you haven't followed the show yet, please follow me on Spotify, on YouTube, on whatever platform it is you are normally used to doing. And I have a new episode every Wednesday, so stay tuned every Wednesday for the next episode, and I will see you next week.